I won't talk much about this particular video. I want us to watch this video. I will be back.
I am white. Check me out, everybody. And part of being white is drawing your attention to my race, like I did just now, goes against all my socialization. I was not raised to think of myself in racial terms. I understood that somebody had race, but not really me. And if we're going to be talking about race, we'd be talking about their race, not mine. I wasn't raised to see my race as significant to anything you could know about me. So what if I'm white, right? Well, I'm really clear today, after a good 20 years of day in and day out talking to people about race, I'm really clear I'm white. I have a white frame of reference, I have a white worldview, and I move through the world with a white experience. And it is not just a universal human experience, as I was taught to believe. It is most particularly a white experience in a society that is deeply separate and unequal by race. So while I'm always coming from that position and that perspective, I just want to be explicit about it tonight. And when I say we and us, I'm talking to the vast majority of people in this room and in any room, and certainly any room that has a table where decisions are being made that affect the lives of people who are not at that table, right? So let me just say a little bit about what I hope will be valuable about this focus for the people of color here tonight. First of all, what I hope will be valuable is that I'm going to name and admit to things in my short period of time in front of you that white people will rarely ever name or admit to. And if you've ever scratched your head wondering, how do they pull this off? Can they really not see this? And why are they so resistant to seeing this? I will help you with that, because you have to navigate my reality on a daily basis in a way that I'm really sorry to say I can be seen as qualified to lead virtually anything with no understanding whatsoever of your reality. And to be really honest, no interest in understanding that reality. And so I hope that that is useful to you with the gaslighting that happens so often. I also want to acknowledge that so much of what I can articulate today about what it means to be white rests on years and years of brilliant and patient mentorship from people of color. People of color have been saying what I'm going to say tonight for hundreds of years at this point. And unfortunately, one of the dynamics of implicit bias is if you are white, whether you're aware of it or not, you're a little more likely to be a little more open to hear it from me. And so if I can use this position in this way to break with white solidarity, I'm going to use it. Okay? And that invokes the master's tools dilemma, right? As I think that Darlene referred to, right? How do you challenge the master's house when you only have the tools of that house, when you're in the house? So I want to be really clear that I am aware that as I stand on this stage with credibility and authority granted to my voice on racism, no less, like virtually every other teacher or professor or role model or authority figure, I am reinforcing the centrality of whiteness. I want to name that. And trust me, I've gone home many a night and tossed and turned over that. Where I always land is that it is a both and, right? To not use this position in this way, for me, is to really be white. And I'd like to be a little less white. Right? And a little less white, by the way, does not mean a little more Italian-American. Okay? It means a little less oppressive, quite frankly, a little less oblivious and arrogant and ignorant and certain, and a little more humble and curious and vulnerable. Right? The last thing that I want to acknowledge is that nothing in society gives any of us good information about how this works. And so hopefully, again, as an insider, I can offer something to people of color. I do think people of color know about white fragility way more than I ever will. But again, I do have an insider's perspective. So let me say a little bit about some of the challenges of trying to educate white people on racism. And a great example is I was recently going to give a similar talk to a large tech company, and before they would sign the contract, the legal department wanted to see my slides. And when they got to this slide, they actually asked me if I could take the word white off the slide. To which I replied, "You really should have vetted me before you called." No, I won't. All right. First of all, I've never met a white person who doesn't have an opinion on racism. Have you? If you are not sure all white people have an opinion on racism, just bring it up the next time you're around a bunch of white people. Maybe tonight when you have a drink in Noe Valley. Okay. I don't think you can grow up in this society or spend any significant time here or any other Western-oriented white settler colonial context and not develop an opinion on racism. That doesn't make it informed. So I'm going to say perhaps my first controversial thing. If you are white, I'm sure you have an opinion on the topic, and I don't know virtually anyone in this room. And yet I am confident to say the following. If you are white and you have not devoted years of sustained study, struggle, and focus on this topic, your opinions are necessarily limited, superficial, and uninformed. Wow, how can I say that when I don't even know you? I mean, maybe you've been to Costa Rica. Maybe you have multiracial nieces and nephews. Maybe you were in Teach for America. I can say it because nothing in dominant culture gives us the information we would need to have an informed opinion on arguably the most complex, nuanced social dilemma for the last several hundred years. For example, you can get through graduate school in this country without ever discussing racism, can you not? You can get through teacher education in this country without ever discussing racism. And if you're in a progressive teacher education program, you'll have one required course, multicultural of some sort. But that doesn't mean you'll be discussing racism. You might just be talking about how to introduce ethnic authors in February. Okay? You can get through law school. You can be seen as qualified to lead anything, virtually. Right? So the first challenge for those of us who are white is humility. I want you to know that I'm not standing in front of the choir right now. Even if you volunteered to come, there is no white choir. I am not the choir. And the moment I think I'm the choir, I'm going to be complacent and arrogant and probably defensive about any suggestion that I might not be as much of the choir as I think that I am. Right? Second challenge is that if I do a good job, this won't be comfortable, particularly for the white people in the room, for the whole time. The status quo is racism. And as a white person, that's comfortable for me virtually 24/7. So I'm not here to uphold that. I want to unsettle that because we will not get where we need to go from a place of white comfort. The key is what we do with those moments of discomfort if I manage to stimulate them. We can certainly use them as a way out. We can also ideally use them as a relatively rare way in. Why does this unsettle me? What would it mean if it were true? And there are two places where white people begin to get uncomfortable when I give a talk, whether you can consciously articulate it to yourself or not. The first place is how often I'm going to say the word white. So prepare yourself, about 100 times. And we're not used to being seen racially. Right? We're not used to having people proceed as if our race has meaning. And the second place where we can begin to get uncomfortable is that I am going to challenge the very precious ideology of individualism. And I'm going to do it by generalizing about white people all night long. And you're going to be just fine. Okay? It is a very precious ideology. In general, I'm talking about the white collective, we don't like to be generalized about. And so, just so you know, if I thought it was racist to generalize about white people, I wouldn't do it, so you don't have to send that email. You can actually ask yourself, well, might I be missing something if I don't understand it? Right? Rather than she must be doing that wrong. Okay? Yes, we are individuals, of course. And I couldn't possibly hold every person's story in this room, even if I wanted to. We are also members of a social group. By virtue of our membership in this social group, we could literally predict whether you and your mother were going to survive your birth, regardless of your age. We can predict how long you're going to live because you're a member of this social group. There's a collective experience to being white. There are shared messages. We are all swimming in the same water, right? And just like gender, the way you respond to gender socialization your challenges to gender socialization, you may have them, there's variations, but nobody can avoid dealing with gender socialization and responding to it. It is the same with racial socialization, right? So every moment that you want to exempt yourself, try this. All right, she's saying most white people X. I was a Y. Okay, good for you. Okay, you were a Y. Most are X. How did Y set you up into the racial hierarchy you live in, swim in, grew up in, breathe in, right? It set you up differently than X set me up, but we both got set up. It's on you to use everything you see as unique about yourself and figure out how it set you up rather than exempted you. And finally, we don't tend to understand the systemic nature of racism. So let's just start there, and I'm going to do this the way that I always do this to explain the difference between personal prejudice that everybody has and systemic racism. So prejudice, prejudgment, everyone has it. There is no human objectivity. We get it from everywhere across our lifespans. Most of it is not conscious. I would highly suggest, and I think it's being sold out there, Dr. Jennifer Eberhardt's new book, Biased, where she pulls together all the research, and the research is clear. All of us have prejudice. I'll use the term bias, and most of it is implicit or unconscious. Okay? And therefore, all of us act on it. The way you see the world drives the way you respond to the world. Right? So everybody has it, everybody does it. But when you back one group's collective racial bias with legal authority and institutional control, it is transformed into a far-reaching system that becomes the default. It becomes automatic. It's not dependent on your friendliness or your good intentions, right? So it gets embedded in all the institutions and also in cultural definitions of what's even normal, right? What is professionalism? What is intelligence? Whose stories are told? By whom? Whose stories are not told, right? And I'm going to use an example from one form of oppression to launch us into the form we're here to talk about tonight. So we're here to talk about racism. I'm very clear you can't really separate these out. But for our purposes, we're going to take a focused look on racism. But I'm going to draw from an example from the form called sexism. And relax, I'm going to use dominant language, because I'm going to use this the way our textbooks teach us, right? So hang in there. Women got the right to vote in this country in 1920. There was only one possible way that women could get the right to vote, and that was for men to give it to us. Women couldn't vote on the right to vote. They couldn't even speak in many public forums to advocate for their right to vote. Could a woman be prejudiced against a man and mean to him in a one-on-one interaction? Of course. Could women as a group literally deny every single man in the society his civil rights? No. Could men deny every woman in the society her civil rights? Yes. And that is a significant difference that must be acknowledged in language, right? Right. So think about today. In 2019, I'm going to offer you a question. Today, if men as a group wanted to take away our right to vote, could they? Now that's a little easier to see today than it was about 10 years ago when I first started asking this question. But I have been asking this question for many years because this is the best example of the difference between individual prejudice and institutional power, you know, when yours is backed. And most people, when I offer that question, there's confusion, they're not so clear. Some people are sure that they could, some are not, which is also part of how oppression works. So let me just show you some basic statistics from 2019. The Fortune 500 CEOs are 98% male. The 10 richest Americans are all men. 7 of them are the richest people in the world. I think economic power is probably the ultimate form. The presidency and the vice presidency has always been 100% male. The Senate, keep in mind we're celebrating the most diverse Senate Congress we've ever had. 75% male, House of Representatives 70% male, the current cabinet 84% male, U.S. mayors 80% male, U.S. governors 84% male, federal judges 87% male, police officers 85% male. So I'll just ask you again, if they wanted to. I'm not saying they would. My point is, by definition, institutional power is deeply embedded in the fabric of society. It's embedded across history. These are not flexible systems. Heads up, we live in patriarchy. We live in an androcentric, male-dominated, patriarchal society. We always have, and it didn't end in 1920. And I'm very confident that if Hillary Clinton had become president, patriarchy wasn't going to end that day. Anymore, I mean, if the word patriarchy came out of her mouth, any more than we can see that racism did not end upon Obama's presidency. I would argue it got an infusion. All systems of oppression can allow for exceptions. The rule will be consistent, right? 2019. And just in case you need a visual on my claim that we live in patriarchy, this is the House Freedom Caucus. This is arguably the most powerful committee in the nation. Talk about making decisions at the table that will affect the lives of people who are not at that table. They're literally discussing the health care bill when this picture was taken. Right? In case you need an image from popular culture, this is cover of Vanity Fair. This is a slide I made. I don't even know who it is. I just Googled white guy. And I got this, and I've got, oh, that's a good one. If you have young people in your life, and if you have kind of self-awareness yourself, you know that children are deeply shaped by films, by media, by imagery and marketing, right? The way that they think about the world and understand the world. And all of us pretty much have been deeply shaped by film. Those who write and direct film are our cultural narrators. And they shape how we see ourselves and how we see ourselves in relation to other people. And of the 100 top grossing films of all time across the world disseminated from the US, 99 were directed by men. And 95 of them white. Institutional power is the ability to disseminate your worldview to everyone and to shape how they see themselves, how they see you, how they see themselves in relationship to you. To tell the story of the other when you are not in relationship with the other, when you don't know the other. To be able to represent the other and to do it and position yourself as simply telling universal human stories, not from any particular position. So that Mike Lee is a film director who makes films about the human condition, and Spike Lee is a black film director who makes films about black issues. So Facebook puts these things out on holidays. This one came out to commemorate the anniversary of women gaining suffrage. And then some folks did this. Which women got access to the vote in 1920? Yeah, white women. So another dimension of institutional power is that your group's experience is held up as universal. So while we were oppressed as women, we were certainly privileged as white. There is no more universal woman's experience than there is a universal human experience on the physical plane where we live in the here and now. Right? And that recognition, I'm sure many of you know, was termed by Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw intersectionality. Right? All right, so legal authority and institutional control is what transforms people's prejudice into a far-reaching system. So let's look at race in 2019, right? So the presidency and vice presidency, 100% white. The US Senate, 91% white. I just have to point out again, the most diverse Congress we've ever had. The House of Representatives, 73% white. The current cabinet, 89% white. The governors, 98% white. Mayors, 88% white. Military advisors, just think about who we go to war with. 100% white. Federal judges, 88% white. Police officers, 80% white. The people who decide which TV shows we see, 93% white. The people who decide which books we read, 90% white. People who decide which news is covered, 85% white. People who decide which music is produced, 95% white. School teachers, 82% white. Full-time college professors, 84% white. Owners of men's pro football teams, 97% white. Owners of men's pro basketball teams, 98% white. The players, 75% black. Right? And yet, what is the definition of a racist, of what it means to be racist in the mainstream? Right? Well, it's an individual, always an individual, not a system, who consciously does not like people based on race. Apparently, if it's not conscious, it doesn't count. And is intentionally mean to them. It also has to be intentional to count. Individual, conscious, malintent across race. That is a racist. And I don't know that you could come up with a better definition to protect the system of racism than this one. Because this definition makes it virtually impossible to talk to the average white person about the inevitable absorption of a racist worldview that we get from living in a culture in which it is infused and embedded across all its institutions, right? I think that this definition is the root of virtually all white defensiveness on this topic. Have you guys noticed any white defensiveness on this topic? Because if that's my definition of a racist, and you've just suggested I've said or done something racist, much less that I benefit from racist just by being white, what I'm going to hear is you just questioned my very moral character. And now I need to defend my moral character, right? And I will, right? So racism is a system, not an event. It certainly occurs in specific moments that we can identify, but of course it's 365, 24/7. It's the system we're in. And part of being raised as a white person in this society has been to be raised to be what I think of as functionally illiterate on this topic. I had opinions, I spouted them freely, I cringe today when I think about that. And part of gaining literacy, and of course that is a lifelong process I will not be finished with, part of gaining literacy has been to understand the kind of collective dimensions of racism, but also how different groups of color get set up differently. So what's in my head about indigenous peoples is different than what's in my head about Asian heritage people, and that's different than what's in there about African heritage people. I have different levels of comfort and anxiety and interest, etc. And therefore, those groups have different experiences, okay? And it's very important that we break that down and that we learn those histories and those struggles and those stereotypes and those experiences. So I want to be really clear. All peoples who are not perceived or defined as white experience racism. And they experience it in shared ways, and they experience it in ways that are different depending on their group and its position to whiteness. Having said that, after 20 years of doing this work, I feel very clear about the following. There is something profoundly anti-black in this culture. And in the white mind, black people are the ultimate racial other. We have the most energy about black people. We have the most resentment and anxiety about black people. And when I have a very short period of time with white people and I want you to get in touch with your early messages, I ask you to think about black people, right? And anti-blackness, there are poles, right? White is here and black is here. And I don't have time to get into it, but there is no white without black. There's a deep need for white, the white collective. There is no superiority without inferiority, right? So there are poles. And anti-blackness cuts across all groups, including black people. The darker you are, the more compounded the oppression. And while I'm here to challenge white people in our complacency, there's a very sensitive couple questions I think peoples of color have to ask themselves. One, what does anti-blackness look like in our group, and who have I aligned with? So having mentioned history, anti-blackness, it's a system, I want to just give you one glance at the trajectory of anti-blackness since the beginning of this country to the current time to illustrate those points. And this slide will be deliberately dense, and we can think about it as state-sanctioned organized crime, quite frankly, against African Americans. And it begins with kidnapping and 300 plus years of enslavement, torture, rape, and brutality, and it carries on. About 1/4 of the way in here, bans on testifying against whites, and you are in my lifetime. 1/4 of the way in that slide, you are in my lifetime where it was technically legal to murder black people in this country. I would love to never again hear another white person say, I didn't own slaves, as if that ended on that day. And about halfway in at employment discrimination, you are now in 2019 with copious empirical evidence. And if you don't know some of these things, that's on you to educate yourself. But I'm going to pick it up in 2019, and let me repeat, copious empirical evidence. Employment discrimination, educational discrimination, bias laws in policing, white flight, subprime mortgages, mass incarceration, school-to-prison pipeline, disproportionate special education referrals and punishments, testing, tracking, school funding, biased media, voter suppression, cultural mockery, historical omissions, unaddressed trauma, to name a few. It's a system. It's the system we're in, and none of us could be and none of us were exempt from its forces. And this system is not interrupted by friendliness. The system is not interrupted because I smile at black people when I pass them by or go to lunch on occasion. And African Americans are not and have never been in the position to do this to the entire white collective, and the white collective has always been and continues to be in the position to do this to African Americans. There is no such thing as reverse racism. Okay? It's a system. All right, now, I know I'm going to need to update this picture pretty soon here. But I can't let go of it yet, because when I saw it, I mean, you can just take a wild guess how I feel about Paul Ryan, but that's not why I picked it. When I saw this picture, I just said, this is what it means to be white. These are his incoming interns. These are our future politicians. These are the people who will sit at the tables making decisions about the lives of those who are not at the table and who they have not been taught are valuable to know or consider or understand. I want you to imagine the neighborhoods they likely grew up in, right? The schools they likely went to, the teachers they likely had, the friendship circles, their wedding albums. And now imagine that these are our future medical researchers. These are our future school teachers. These are our future social workers, right? Our future lawyers, etc., right? And this is the position from which white people claim we're objective on race. Yeah. Just get that image back in your mind of that history slide, and then just look at this. This is last year's college champion Jeopardy playoff. So those are our best and our brightest, soon to be certified as highly educated from our institutions of higher learning. And that's the board at the end of the grand champion round. So as we can see, there was one category not one of them touched. Clearly the most difficult. Nobody was going to risk losing the grand championship. You know, it's just one picture. I think it speaks volumes. And I don't feel that I can do justice to what it means that we don't know our history. That we could ever separate it out and see it as their history, not the history of this country. Because when we don't know our history and we cannot trace it into the present, we are left with deeply problematic explanations for current conditions, victim-blaming explanations. So I want to walk you through some questions. I'm going to ask you, you can close your eyes, you can look down at the ground. I just want to, in your mind, I want you to notice what images and what narratives come up for you, right? And I would like you to answer these questions from your childhood self, your younger self, not your sophisticated adult self, maybe 10, 11, 12. What do you see? Kind of how would you explain it? So how racially diverse was your neighborhood growing up? If your neighborhood was not racially diverse, why wasn't it? Where did people of different races than you live? If they didn't live in your neighborhood, where did they live? And what was it like where people of different races than yourself lived? And how did you know? What images come to your mind when you think about the spaces where they were? And why didn't you live in the same neighborhood? Why don't we live in the same neighborhood? Were you encouraged to visit the neighborhoods where people that were of a different race than you lived and get to know the people there, build relationships with them? Or were you discouraged from doing that? And if so, how? How was that conveyed to you? What were the characteristics of a good school? What makes a school good? What are the characteristics of a bad school? What makes a school bad? What's it like at a bad school? What images do you get? Did your parents care about what kind of school you went to? Did they have any energy about that? And if so, why? Were the honors or advanced placement classes and the lower track classes equally racially integrated? And if not, why not? How often have you had a teacher or professor of your own race, or races if you're multiracial? How often have you been to a wedding that was either all or virtually all white? If we opened your wedding album, if you're married, what would we notice? How often have you been to a funeral that was virtually all white or all white? And what are some of the ways in which your race has shaped your life? So I ask these questions to get to the earlier messaging. I have a pretty good idea of the patterns of, that rose up as you thought about them. And yet when you put all this together, right, our socialization into deep racist bias, our definition of a racist as a mean, bad person, you get some rather superficial white narratives. So I want to be really clear about something. As a result of being raised in this society, I have a racist worldview. I have racist biases. I have racist patterns that have developed as a result of that. And I also have investments in the system of racism. It's quite comfortable, and it has helped me overcome the barriers that I have faced. For example, in my early childhood, I did go to diverse schools because I grew up in poverty. But as I moved upwards, upwardly mobile, it got whiter and whiter. And nobody ever encouraged me to maintain those relationships across race, right? So being white has definitely helped me navigate the barriers I faced. And I also have an investment in not seeing anything I just named, which is why I'm the least likely to be able to determine how well I'm doing. I did not choose to be socialized into a racist worldview, racist patterns, and racist investments. I didn't have the choice. And it's actually incredibly liberating to start from the premise that of course I was socialized into it. And so I can stop defending, deflecting, denying. I don't struggle with guilt about that, right? I feel responsible for that socialization. right? So starting from that premise actually is liberating because I can just get to work trying to identify what it's looking like in my life, in my relationships, and in my work. Right? But not starting from that premise leads us to say some rather superficial things. So Darlene acknowledged that my area of scholarship is in critical discourse analysis, and that is the critical examination of language. That words and terms are not just neutral descriptors for something, that the language that we have shapes how we view that thing, which is why language is always political and always a site of struggle. And as I listen to the things that white people say when the topic of racism comes up, I literally got this image in my mind of a dock. And it signifies two things. One, how superficial this is, what we say. But also, if you look at the dock from up above, it looks like it's just floating on the water, right? But it's not just floating on the water. It's resting on an entire structure that's submerged underneath that props it up. And everything I do in my work is to try to get us off the top and get under there and look at that structure, because despite what's on the top, our outcomes are not changing, right? And so I kind of think of them in two sets, colorblind and color celebrate. Probably the number one of the colorblind is I was taught to treat everyone the same. Anybody ever heard that one? Some version of I was taught to treat everyone the same? Okay, you ready? Not one single person in this room was taught to treat everyone the same. You weren't. You don't. You couldn't. And you couldn't be taught to do it. You could be told to do it. I could lecture you to do it. You don't do it. You can't do it. You don't even want to do it because people have different needs. So when I hear this from a white person, there is a bubble over my head. It's got a couple things in it. One, oh, this person doesn't understand basic socialization. This person doesn't understand culture. God, this person is not self-aware. And I just need to give a heads up to the people, to the white people in the room, and I'm going to look at Darlene, because Darlene will call me if I miss it here. To the white people in the room, when people of color hear us say that, they're generally not thinking, all right, I'm talking to a woke white person right now. No? All right, I got that? All right. Usually some version of eye rolling is going on, and a wall is going up. Erin Trent Johnson is a black woman I often co-lead with, and she says, when I hear that from a white person, what I'm thinking is this is a dangerous white person. This is a white person who's going to need to deny my reality. It's just not doing what we think it's doing. Right? That's the colorblind. Now we've got the color celebrate. Oh, I work in a very diverse environment. I think that one's popular in Oakland. I have people of color in my family. Me, I'm not racist. I live in Oakland. Okay? That one gets used interchangeably with I'm not racist, I'm from Canada. I'm not racist, I'm from Germany. I'm not racist, I was in the military. Okay? Sociologists actually have a term for this one. It's called the inoculation case. I've been near people of color, it stripped me of all my racism. I'm always like, wow, you walk by people of color and you didn't lose your shit. Okay, that's amazing. All right. I want you to notice how often white people invoke proximity as their evidence of a lack of racism. And this is important to notice because it helps reveal what we think racism is, right? It helps reveal what's under the dock. What do I think racism is? That proximity would show that I don't have it, okay? So these last three, how many of you in a conversation with a white person have heard some version of those last three? Okay, and if we're being honest, we've said some version of these, right? So let's do the discourse analysis on these. When a white person invokes one of these narratives, when racism comes up, they're giving you their evidence, right? This is white people's evidence. In my mind, what is this my evidence of? What do I want to make sure you know? I'm not racist, right? This is not even a stretch, is it? This is what white people say to establish their lack of racism, correct? Okay, so if this is my evidence that I'm not racist, then in order to be good evidence, it has to distinguish me from a racist, right? So a racist apparently can't do those things, or else that would not be good evidence. So a racist can't work 3 cubicles down from a person of color. Couldn't have people call their family, and apparently there's living in Oakland frees the white folks from racism, right? No racists in Oakland. All right. So a racist can't tolerate proximity based on this evidence, right? Are you starting to see how thin that is? Because even an avowed racist can tolerate proximity. I owned my racist conditioning earlier. I don't see myself as an avowed racist. An avowed racist is someone who embraces that conditioning. I seek to challenge that conditioning. But even avowed racists can interact and have proximity across race. Here's an example. So the black man is Gary Young. He's a reporter for The Guardian. And he is interviewing white nationalist Richard Spencer, the white man, right? Richard Spencer is what I would call an avowed racist. He organized the march in Charlottesville. Right? Now look at the body language. Completely relaxed. Richard Spencer's not freaking out. He's having a calm conversation with Gary Young. Richard Spencer might go home and have, nieces and nephews of color in his family, right? Here he is at the march. Right. Children are so much more open, right? Of all the things I say, this is probably about the hardest, what I'm about to say. The research is very clear that by age 3 to 4, all children who grow up here understand it's better to be white. No child misses the message. And it's not a singular, isolated message. It's not dependent on some mean person. That message circulates 24/7. And they know it, and they absorb it. And when we project this racial innocence on them, we leave them unattended to it. They can't resist it. So Frozen, for me, is a great example for the younger and for the teen years. This is last year's top 5 runners-up for Miss Teen USA. No little girl misses the message. And yes, they are 5 different girls. You have to concentrate really hard. But when you give up, just go over here and look at the sides. You can see the states. Okay? Okay, I mean, just take it in Miss Teen USA. This is the group that they were drawn from, right? But is that not how it always is? There'll be 1, maybe 2 to the back or to the side, right? And because I know my people, I am confident that for all these white girls, that 1 black girl is their evidence for why they're not racist. Everybody loved her. Nobody had a problem with her. Now you get that young woman alone in a room with someone she trusts and debrief her. I can't imagine what that experience was like for her. But I want to move these white girls way past were you or weren't you friendly to the black girl. If you were friendly to the black girl, you're free of all racism. I want to move them to a really different place, which is what's going on here? How does it keep getting reproduced? How have you been shaped by it? And what role will you play going forward to reproduce it yourself if you can't see it or understand it? It's just a very different question. I was in the Peace Corps. I'm going to teach for America. I'm a minority myself. I marched in the 60s. I was on a mission in Africa. I've been doing this for years. So I'm going to ask another set of rhetorical questions. These are the white progressives, evidence to my dear friend Darlene. Darlene, could a racist work 3 cubicles down from you? Even one who doesn't think they're racist? Even one on the equity team? All right, folks on equity teams. All right, I'm all for equity teams, or whatever you call them, D&E, I&E, E&D, anything but racial equity teams. You don't want to scare the white people, so don't don't put race in there, but I'm all for equity teams. But I also need to say that some of the most gatekeeping, obstructionist white people are on equity teams and in equity work, right? And I have been in many equity teams where most of our energy was spent strategizing how to get around another white person on the equity team. So I just want to be clear that, of course, there are some very constructive people, white people in those teams. The key is it doesn't certify you. Nothing certifies you. It's the complacency and the arrogance, right? Which, of course, sets up defensiveness. Right? I'm going to ask another rhetorical question to the people of color in the room. Do you have white people whom you love dearly and who on occasion reveal a racist worldview to you? Yes. Okay, white people, did you hear that? Yeah. Could you even be married to them? Yes. Okay. White people, did you hear that? Okay. Let me put it this way. I'm married to a man. He's a white man. Trust me, the day he fell in love with me, all his sexism did not vanish. Au contraire. He's a product of patriarchy, as am I. You know, it comes out, and we struggle with it. And I would never say we are free of all gender conditioning and all sexist dynamics because we love each other. But notice the moment there's fond regard, all race and racism and racial bias disappears for white people. We're very funny on this one. Okay? Well, this is probably popular in Oakland. We don't like how white our neighborhood is or is getting, but we had to move here for the schools. What could we do? I think it's disingenuous. I think we do like how white our neighborhoods are. And I don't think our kids could be exceptional and have the best if somebody didn't have less. I think that's a hard conversation we need to have. But these are, of course, all colors celebrate narratives. You know, I see it, I embrace it. There's a question that's never failed me in my efforts to uncover how do we get the outcomes we're getting then if this is what's going on. And that question isn't, is this true or is this false? Were you or weren't you taught to treat everyone the same? We're going to debate that. The question that's never failed me is, how do these narratives function in the conversation? What happens when racism gets on the table and a white person invokes one of these narratives? And when we ask that question, I think we can see that all of them exempt the person from any part of the problem. All of them take racism off the table, nothing to see here. In doing that, all of them close rather than open the exploration. And in doing that, all of them protect the current racial hierarchy and the white position within it. They're exemptors and closers and protectors. And you don't have to be consciously thinking, I know what I'll do. But that's the impact that they have. Okay? We really need to ask ourselves, what framework of meaning am I coming from that this would seem to me to be good evidence? And how do I actually know how it's landing on the other side? Okay? So we're going to do a little turn-in talks. You have to come back when I call you. But I am going to have you turn to the person next to you. Those of you that are in this work know that we often caution white people, you know, don't take up all the space, don't talk first, and because that's our usual pattern, until it's a high-risk question on race. Oh, then I'm going to let the person of color go first, and then I'll just model whatever I say on whatever they just said. Okay. So if you turn and the person, you're interracial, one of you is white, white person, go first. Take that risk. Do not give the race work to people of color. All right, so this question you're going to answer if you're white is basically, how do you credential yourself in conversations about race? What moves do you make to signal that you're not racist or you're less racist? Never met a white person who doesn't do this. I do this. I try not to do this. I catch myself doing it. And if I told you that people of color notice when we're doing this, how do you think it's actually impacting the conversation? Okay? And if you are black, indigenous, person of color, the question is, how have you noticed white people credentialing themselves. And does it work? And just before I forget, a group of people had asked if I could go out for a drink after the talk. And I can't do that because it's Monday night. Yeah, Monday night I have my Ta-Nehisi Coates book study group. And I always... I always follow it with a double feature of Black Panther and Get Out. My 5th time, actually. And now I have to add Green Book, so I'm just booked. I'm not going to be able to go out for a drink, but I just gave you 4 more moves. So could be something I've named, could be something, but just how do you do it, and what do you think about it now? Okay, so just give you a couple minutes. All right, welcome back. Yeah, welcome back. Welcome back, everybody. Thank you. Obviously, I can't give you the time that I'd love to give you, so keep thinking about this one. And about now, if you're white, you might be thinking, holy shit, I can't do anything and get this right. And that's true, actually. You can't. So that can never be the reason for not staying in the struggle. I think the guidance I would offer is show, don't tell. Right? If it's truly integrated in the way you see the world, it will come through. It will be there. You don't have to be driven by anxiety and urgency. Because whenever I'm driven by racial anxiety and urgency, odds are it's going to land problematically on the other side. Right? And what people of color have shared with me that comes up for them when they notice us doing this are a couple things. One, in those moments, they feel very racialized. They see us saying things and acting in ways we're not acting when we're with other white people, right? They feel objectified. And often what they're thinking is, so what? Right? Like, yeah, that just doesn't mean anything, right? That you, whatever it was. Right? So this was the last question I offered you in the reflection. And I want to share with you, I've been asking this question of white people for 20 years. My second book, What Does It Mean to Be White, is me seeking to answer this question. And I want to share with you some common patterns when I ask white people this question. Because usually if we have a workshop, they're in kind of dyads or triads, and they get a minute each. And I think the patterns, again, are very revealing. So the first pattern is that it's a very uncomfortable question for a lot of white people to be asked. And the second pattern is that it's very difficult for us to answer it with any depth or criticality at all. I have seen so many dyads and triads of people where a white person couldn't actually feel 1 minute. 60 seconds, they couldn't feel it. They just let the time go by, right? And so I want to offer, oh, by the way, if you're a white progressive from Oakland, you could probably throw the word privilege in there, but it doesn't mean, right, that you can really answer the question with depth, okay? And I want to offer that our inability to answer this question is not benign. It's not actually innocent either. That collectively, it creates a hostile environment for people of color, particularly those living and working in primarily white spaces. Because if I can't tell you what it means to be white, I can't hold what it means not to be white, right? I'm going to have no critical thinking on this topic. I'm going to have no skills in navigating the conversation, and I'm going to have no emotional stamina to endure the discomfort of the conversation. And people of color working with us know that this inability we bring to the table. And what that means is they cannot be their authentic selves with us. They cannot bring their experiences to us. They cannot talk to us about what they're experiencing because they know that we can't handle it. And so they have to spend inordinate amounts of energy trying not to unsettle white people. Right? That it actually is better to take it home, to endure that slight and that indignity, than risk enduring more slights and indignities by trying to talk to the person about it. So I'm just going to ask a rhetorical question to people of color in the room. How often have you tried to talk to a white person about our inevitable and often unaware racist patterns and perspectives and assumptions, and had that go well for you? Even white people laugh, right? Even we know it doesn't tend to go well, okay? And so it creates a hostile environment. You know, we really have to change what we understand it means to create a hostile environment. I, as a white progressive, am never going to say the N-word. I'm not going to say a just blatant racial slur. But my inability most of my life to answer that question has contributed to a climate that has been hostile to the people of color in my life that have interacted with me. Okay? I want to say something about white progressives. Do you guys know that white progressives are my specialty? Have I mentioned that? Did I mention that yet? No? All right, well, white progressives are my specialty. So what's a white progressive? I'm not talking Democrat versus Republican. I'm talking about any white person sitting in this room right now thinking, it's not me. It's less me. Any white person sitting here right now going through their exemptions, or sitting here thinking about some other white person who really should have been here tonight. We are white progressives, and we're my specialty because I'm a huge white progressive. I totally get the consciousness. And when I first applied for a job leading in interracial teams, primarily white employees in the workplace, in conversations about race, I thought, well, of course I'm qualified to do that. I'm a vegetarian. I mean, like, how could I be racist? I mean, I would need to be a vegan today, but, I mean, that was the 90s. That was very progressive to be a vegetarian. You know, I just have this, you know, it's all about open-mindedness. And I think we can be the most difficult because, one, we're so oblivious, but also we can be so defensive and so complacent, right? And the degree that our identities are attached to being free of racism, we're actually going to be more resistant to any feedback that we're behaving in problematic ways. I mean, this is the challenge of a white progressive. On the one hand, oh my God, I would never want to accidentally say or do anything racist. Don't you dare tell me I just said or did something racist. Right? So it's a very tight hook. When we do answer this question, we tend to organize our answers around people of color. So I'll tell you a story about an early friendship or a moment or an incident or an interaction. And that's really revealing too, because of course that's not answering the question. But it reveals how deeply we associate race with what they have and how unracialized our own identities are. How unable we are to see white space as racial space. People say, I grew up in a sterile white, and I'd be like, oh yeah, no, it wasn't sterile, trust me. Teeming with race, teeming with race. Every moment, because it's also the result of decades and decades of policies and practices. White space is not natural or some kind of fluke. You didn't just happen to, right? But every moment I spend in white space, I'm being deeply reinforced in many, many problematic dynamics and understandings of the world. Okay? All right. So I'm just going to go over some of the ways that my life has been shaped by my race. And first of all, the relentless messages that white is the ideal for humanity, that white is the human ideal. And I don't know that I could come up with a better representation of it than this, God creating man. Okay? And of course, as a child, I didn't look up and go, oh, God is white. I never have to. It's just relentless, right? I grew up in poverty. When I say that, I mean that very explicitly. Periods of living in our car, periods of being left with people I didn't know. I didn't go to college until I was in my 30s. I had a very deep sense of shame as a child around that poverty. And I always knew I was white. Come on. Sorry. I mean, white folks that grow up poor or working class, you could say that to be poor and working class and white is the same as to be poor and working class and black. I always knew I was white. And being white has absolutely helped me navigate classism, right? We have to ask ourselves not how some other struggle or oppression, and let me be clear, I'm not saying white people don't struggle or face oppression, but we don't face that one. And not facing that one absolutely helps us navigate the struggles we do face. But I think that the most profound way that my life has been shaped by my race is that I could be born into, I could grow up, I could build friendship circles and celebrate milestones and play. I could learn and be taught. Right? I could be highly educated and certified as highly educated. I could work. I could lead and make decisions that affect other people's lives. I could worship. I could love. How many of you have been to a wedding that if it wasn't all white, it was pretty close to all white? Okay? Your wedding, big or small, is your circle. And it speaks to how separately we live our lives, right? So I could love and I could die in racial segregation. And not one person who's ever loved or mentored me has ever conveyed to me that I've lost anything of value. That is the deepest message of all. Again, I'm never going to say the N-word. But that deeply internalized absence of any loss in living a segregated life has profoundly shaped me, my worldview, what I care about, what I don't care about, what I see, what I don't see, what I'm drawn to, what I'm not drawn to, right? My wedding looked a lot like that. Why would my funeral not look like that? White people can easily go cradle to grave in segregation without anyone conveying they've lost anything that mattered, right? Without any relationships across race and with black people in particular. In fact, we white people measure the value of our lives and our neighborhoods and our schools by the absence of people of color. I want you to think about how we talk about the Jim Crow South as a tragedy that was imposed upon black people. And we live the most segregated lives of any group that we choose that, and we celebrate it by talking about how good it is because it's white. I'm going to repeat. We measure the value of our spaces by the absence of people of color and black people in particular. My psychosocial development was inculcated in this water. I've internalized this message. I didn't miss this message. And it does seep out of my pores. The fundamental message is there's no inherent value in the perspectives or experiences of people of color. And these messages are raining down on every one of us 24/7. There are no umbrellas. No one had an umbrella. No one had an umbrella. Nothing could exempt you from these messages. How we respond to them might vary. We all are getting them. So if we go back under that surface and we say, what is it that is propping all of this up? This is my best thinking about what it is. The good-bad binary, which is just this idea that racists are bad, not racists are good. You're either or, and if you're good, you couldn't possibly be racist. Deep implicit bias, which you can't help but absorb. The precious ideology of individualism, which allows us to exempt ourselves from all of this because, we're different. At the same time, universalism, which allows us to see ourselves as speaking for everyone from no particular position. Right? Internalized superiority. And on some level, an investment, which is why we cannot be trusted. on this topic. And then the power of segregation to hold it all in place, even if our immediate lives are not segregated, the society at large. So I just want to go over some key maybe terms. So white supremacy. I'm very comfortable saying the term white supremacy. Yes, it includes extremists or neo-Nazis, what we would think about. That's how I grew up with that definition. It is also a highly descriptive sociological term for the society we live in. A society in which white people are elevated as the ideal for humanity and everyone else is a deficient version of that, right? White supremacy, okay? Whiteness are all of the unnamed elements that together reproduce and protect white supremacy. White privilege is one of the outcomes of white supremacy. And what I think I may be offering to this conversation is white fragility is what surfaces when any of the above is acknowledged or questioned. Right? And that functions to protect it and keep it back in place. Right? So what are some common responses to feedback on all of this? Right? Now just tell me if you've ever noticed it. Right? Ever notice these responses from white people when any of this is suggested? Okay, apparently. All right. Denying, arguing, withdrawing, crying, explaining, claims that we've been attacked, focusing on our intentions, seeking absolution or forgiveness, insistence on misunderstanding. Right? Emotions are political. Right? So we kind of tend to think about it as some natural thing that just emerges and so that all have to be attended to and protected. Emotions are political for a couple of reasons. One, the framework you're perceiving and interpreting through is what drives the particular emotions that you have, and it is a socio-political framework. That is why 20 years ago, if you told me that I was racist, I would have been extremely upset. And today, if you tell me I'm racist, I'm going to be very interested in you helping me see how. Those are very different emotional responses because my framework is different. And emotions are also political because they drive behaviors that are externalized and affect other people. Okay? This is why white women's tears is a problem. Okay? So these emotions function in particular ways. Again, they're not benign and they're not neutral. And this leads to what I call white fragility. The inability to tolerate the racial stress of a challenge to our positions, our perspectives, our assumptions. And it functions to block the challenge and regain our equilibrium or our positions, right? And when I first coined this term, the fragility part is meant to capture how little it takes to cause white people to melt down. You may have noticed, right? For a lot of white people, generalizing about white people will cause us to melt down. Suggesting that being white has meaning. And then, if you're a white progressive and you're involved in the work, it would probably take way more. Generally, what I notice is everything's fine no matter what you say until you actually look directly at the person and say, let me tell you how you're being racist right now. Okay, then that blows up, okay? So the fragility part is that it generally does not take much at all to set us off, but the response is not fragile at all because it marshals behind it the weight of history, legal authority, and institutional control. So it is a weaponized hurt feelings, weaponized defensiveness, weaponized tears. My sister, who's hearing me for the first time, my beloved sister, was laughing when she saw this picture because this is my husband. I made him pose in the kitchen. He's like, everyone's going to think I'm an asshole. And I'm like, yeah. All going to think you're an asshole. All the room is taken under patriarchy, so you got white fragility. Okay. All right. So I think about white fragility as the sociology of dominance. Right? It's how we maintain our positions. And so, again, it's not weakness per se. I think white fragility functions as a kind of everyday white racial bullying. We make it so miserable for people of color to talk to us about our inevitable and often unaware racist patterns and behaviors that most of the time they don't. They endure lest they risk more punishment because the experience typically is it gets worse, not better. So it's a form of everyday white racial control because you can be with us and around us in the right doses and the right numbers from the right groups, and we will definitely claim you as diversity cover as long as you don't challenge us. And if you challenge us, well, you might get away with it once, but I wonder if people of color can even get away with it once in the workplace. Okay, I'm getting a no here. Before they're seen as a troublemaker and difficult. And the consequences of that are devastating. Loss of job, criminalization, institutionalization is very serious. And I want to say something about my use of humor. In some ways it's my style, if you hang out with me. It's also a strategy. And notice that as comedians use the term punching up rather than punching down, I do think that we need to laugh at how ridiculous we are in so many ways. But of course, ridiculous there are devastating consequences to that. And it also helps relieve tension. Right? We can start to kind of have cognitive dissonance and shut down, and the laughter kind of helps loosen us up. But I don't ever, ever, ever mean to be glib about the consequences of all of this. Right? Okay. So when you think about those behaviors and those feelings, and you ask yourself, what could be under the dock that would cause us to behave that way, right? Well, certainly the mainstream definition of what it means to be racist, but this is what I think must be under there to cause these responses. Nice people cannot also act in racist ways, apparently. Racism can only be conscious and intentional. Not having intended it cancels it out. As a white person, I will be the judge of whether racism has occurred. My learning is finished. I know all I need to know. I've done lots of travel. White people who experience oppression or have suffered cannot also act in racist ways or benefit from the system of racism. My race has no bearing on my perspective. Yours definitely has a bearing on yours, but mine has no bearing on the matter. I am qualified to determine whether people of color's experiences are legitimate or not. And if I don't understand it, it's not legitimate. As a white person, I know the best way to challenge racism, and you're doing it wrong. I have no accountability to people of color, yet I'm confident that I'm free of racism. I have proximity to people of color, so I'm confident that I'm free of racism. I have no proximity to people of color, so I'm racially innocent. I grew up on a small farm, don't know anything about it. I would just offer, if you grew up on a small farm in a little town and the next town or farm was 10 miles away, you may be actually less sheltered from the forces of racism. Because what and who were you left to rely on for your understanding? Right? Jokes, omissions, warnings. White people are objective on racism. Okay? So maybe, let's see, how are we doing on time? We're pretty good. I'm going to give you one more turn and talk, okay? Just to, because this is a long, 2 hours is a long time. And in your turn and talk, if you are white, my question for you is, given all of this, what are your current accountability practices? Now, having a friend of color is not an accountability practice. Being married to a person of color is not an accountability practice. Accountability practice is a conscious, intentional understanding that this is coming at you 24/7, and you have to put some supports in place to keep you focused on it and to challenge you. So you are engaged in the work, You attend affinity group, you attend a multiracial group, you engage with the writings and work of people of color, you have someone who coaches with you, you have a person of color who has agreed, and ideally you pay to help you see your racism. Right, that's an accountability practice. And if you don't have one, just admit it, okay? All right, turn to the person next to you. And if you're a person of color, anything you do or don't want to say about anything. Welcome back. I'm so curious about how many white people just spent that 2 minutes credentialing themselves. All right. I made a claim earlier. You know, I mean, if you're with me, you're probably like, okay. But I said that this internalized superiority comes out of my pores. And it's on me to figure out how. And you may be sitting here going, okay, I can give her that, but my God, I hope it's not coming out of my pores. What does that look like, right? So I want to give you a really amplified example of what it looks like to say that internalized superiority is kind of seeping out of your pores. And if you can see it in this example, then maybe you can say, well, what would be my version of that? Okay? And I'm going to do it by returning to this picture. Because I can't find a better visual representation of the embodiment of institutional power. I actually think literally this might be the most powerful group of people in the world. Certainly the decisions they make are profoundly powerful in this country. That's Mike Pence there in the middle of the table. They are making decisions, right, that affect millions and millions and millions of people, all right? So can you see that this is a good representation of what it means to say institutional power? You know, that whatever, even if they were the nicest people in the world, by virtue of that homogeneity, they're going to embed implicit bias in the policies and practices, right? Because they simply don't even know other people's realities or needs. Okay. So if you walked into the room, would it be almost visceral to you? Can you also see that these men, I mean, by every axis, they're cis, white men, they're probably multimillionaires, they probably went to the finest schools, and their entire lives they've been groomed to be sitting at that table and have always seen themselves as the smartest people in any room. Okay? You're all clear, aren't you, that people who grow up poor don't end up at that table? There may be an exception, but these were groomed from early age. I mean, come on, Bill Gates' son has every opportunity, regardless of whether he's mediocre or not, right? So this lifetime of being groomed to be at that table, I would feel it viscerally, that kind of superiority. If I walked into that room, I would find it an intimidating room to walk into. Okay? And while I can't know this, I believe that they don't see anyone of value missing in terms of race or gender. And I think if you suggest it to them, you really should get some white women and some men and women of color in this room. I actually think that they would feel contempt. Whether they would admit it or not, I think they would feel contempt. It would be just below the surface. Annoyance at the least, and I don't think they see that as valuable. And nothing's ever given them the message that it's valuable to include, right? Is that just kind of clear to you? Is it fair to say? I mean, again, I don't know them, but I'm pretty confident, right? So that's kind of what it looks like. And as a woman, okay, I'm going to go to gender now for just a minute. If I walked, I'm a cis woman, if I walked into that room, like I said, it would be visceral to me. And let's imagine that they were just, you know, somebody mentioned at some point that maybe they should have a woman in their group. And so, you know, I mean, they needed to discuss that for a couple of years. They needed some data collection and some focus groups. But they finally agree, well, okay, you know, the optics are not good. We probably should get a woman in there. So they finally get one, and it's you. Okay, so for all the people who identify as women in this room, your job is go in that room and help them see that they'd put it like this, their gender bias in case they had any, and you'd be seeing it as they want me to tell them when they're being sexist. So you think about 2 weeks in, you'd have a nice long list of all the sexist patterns and dynamics that you experienced in that room? And if you shared that with them, you think they'd receive that really well? Okay, so then you think you'd ever do it again? Okay. So just all those dynamics is very, very clear to me that all that socialization be seeping out of their pores. Right? So for all the women in the room that could relate to that example, now I want you to imagine that this is the group. They really need a woman of color on their board. Women of color, you're going to go in there and be the only one who helps those white women see their racism? Does that sound good? That doesn't sound good to you? If you walked in the room, would a lifetime of internalized white superiority be visceral to you? Right? My point is that I can be in this room experiencing everything that I mapped out, and I can be in this room perpetrating the same thing. White women, we do not land any more lightly on people of color. White women, we have not been good allies in any consistent way, and there is not a universal sisterhood. And I think when we don't back people of color, that the hurt and the betrayal is deeper. Because we have a potential way in through sexism, but we so often use it as a way out. So use it as a way in, use it to figure out and to connect and to draw those, but not to exempt yourselves. Again, I can be experiencing oppression in this room and perpetrating in that room. Right? Right. Are you here right now? Is this what you're thinking? I know my sister is. All right, I get it. Okay, now what do I do? That's the number one question I get when I give a talk, and I got to tell you that I find it a very problematic question. I think it's a disingenuous question. I think most white people aren't going to do anything different. No, you're just going to keep smiling at people. No, honestly. I mean, prove me wrong. I hope you prove me wrong. And you know, part of being white is that you have that choice, and most of us are going to make that choice. So here's what I'm going to offer you. I didn't do this earlier, but it's getting late. So if you're white and you are going to make the choice not to do anything different, then I'd like you to go home tonight and look at yourself in the mirror, in the eyes, and say out loud, I choose to collude with white supremacy. And then just carry on. But do it with honesty. Because there is no neutral place. Right? Thank you. The default is racism. It's not an aberration, it's a norm. And so anything of carrying on is to contribute to the default. Okay? And I mean, I hope that motivates you. But if this is your question, my question back to you is, how have you managed not to know? It's 2019, and the information is everywhere, and people of color have been telling us forever. How have you managed not to know? How have you managed to be a full, functioning adult and not know what to do about racism? Because I think we actually have to work not to know. We have to work not to see, right? It's a willful not knowing. And what would you do about anything you had the remotest interest in finding out something about? You would Google the shit out of it, okay? I mean, you're watching a movie, right? And is Keanu Reeves still alive? I don't. For a lot of us white people, just looking it up is to break with the apathy of whiteness, right? So my offering that back is meant to challenge you, right? People of color have been telling us what to do forever. Their work is everywhere. But it's also a sincere question, because if you take out a piece of paper and you actually start to write down why you don't know, you're going to have a map. Nothing on it will be easy or simple. But there it is. Number one, I wasn't educated on any of this. Okay, what are you going to do about that? Number 2, I don't talk about these things. Number 3, I don't have cross-racial relationships. Right? I haven't cared enough. I don't want to feel guilty. Just put it all down there and then start to look at it. So if I don't want to feel guilty is on your list, my list, right? Wasn't educated, don't talk, right? Don't have people of color in my life, haven't cared enough. I forgot this is a new slide. Then what I'm going to offer you is a very different framework that will change that, right? So internalize this, put this under that doc, and I do believe it will transform so much of this, right? So strive to internalize a framework of humility. And by the way, you're going to want to take pictures, which is just fine. You can literally download all those lists that I've done so far from a handout on my website. Just go into the resources tab, and this one's called White Fragility, A Guide to Feedback. Put it on the table next time you have a work meeting. All right. Ibram Kendi, stamped from the beginning, says a racist policy is any policy with a racially inequitable outcome. By that measure, all our policies are racist. So get them on the table, put the handout about white fragility on the table with it, and go for it. All right. Racism is a multi-layered, hierarchical system infused in all aspects of society. Nothing has exempted me from the racial hierarchy I live in. The question is not if, but how. Thinking in terms of good people versus bad people is not useful. White people are not objective on racism. I am not objective. Everyone has bias. Most of it's unconscious. I have unconscious bias. Racism is complex. I don't have to understand it for it to be valid. White comfort maintains the racial status quo, so discomfort is important. But I must not confuse comfort with safety. I am perfectly safe in conversations of racism. I think safety is an illegitimate word to come from the mouths of white people on this topic, and I think it perverts the true history of harm. Yeah? My analysis must be intersectional and accountable. It's on me to continually educate myself. My learning is not finished. I bring my group's history with me. History matters, and it's a history of harm. Right? So rather than demand to be seen as a unique individual, I need to understand that I am also a white individual having this interaction. Feedback on white racism is difficult to give. How I receive the feedback is just not relevant. It takes courage to break with white solidarity. White solidarity is the unspoken agreement amongst white people that will protect each other's racism. It takes courage to break with it. So how can I support those that do? And what I want to say to you, if you're white and you're choosing not to break with white solidarity, that's fine, but please get out of the way of other white people who are trying to. People of color's distrust in our schools and institutions is rational. Yeah? We earned their distrust. There is a deep history of harm between our schools and children of color. Who does not know this? Who does not know that our schools have done terrible by children of color? And parents of color are delivering their precious, beautiful children into an institution with a deep history of harm towards those children. So earn their trust if you're a teacher. Don't get your back up because they automatically don't trust you. Right? It's rational. Given socialization, it's more likely that I am the one who doesn't understand the issue. People come in the room, can you imagine if white people would just take up that one? Okay. Racism hurts people of color, even kills people of color 24/7. Interrupting it is more important than my feelings, ego, or self-image. Yeah? And I do believe if we could internalize this framework, not only would our interpersonal relationships change, but so would our institutions, because we would see that they do. So I want to be really clear that I As a result of this work, I am confident to say that I do less harm. I still do harm, but I do less of it. And I'm not defensive at all when I do it, and I have very good repair skills. And that has built trust, right? And less harm could be one more hour on my beloved friend Darlene's life that she didn't take my nonsense home and agonize all night long about whether it was worth it to talk to me or not. And we see stress-related illnesses and life expectancy impacted by that, right? Less harm is no small thing. Okay? So I have a final offering for the Oakland progressives. Niceness is not courageous. There's nothing courageous about niceness. You won't be actually seen as particularly nice if you push racism onto the table. I'm not saying don't be nice, better than, be nice. But that's not anti-racism, right? In some ways, racism depends on white people just being nice and carrying on, right? It takes strategic, intentional action and courage. And so I thank you for being here, and I would like to leave you with another image of a transformed world. Thank you.
Please go to my description box, click on the Telegram link, and join us on Telegram as we are discussing the well-being of Africa and Africans in diaspora. If today is also your first time coming to this channel, then don't forget to subscribe to this channel and turn on the notification button so that anytime I upload any great content, you will be notified. I'm always your guy, De-Graft Amoako. Thanks for watching.